Since the shooting death of Trayvon Martin almost 17 months ago, the media coverage has focused mostly on how George Zimmerman could possibly get away with the killing of a black teen. But shock over Zimmerman's acquittal has some accusing the media of buying into a false story.
Not guilty.
For many, the acquittal of George Zimmerman and the shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin came as a shock.
Confusion and disbelief.
They found him not guilty.
Thousands have taken to the streets in cities coast to coast.
But if people were outraged by the verdict, Zimmerman's attorney says that's because the media pushed a storyline that his client was a racist who preyed on an unarmed black teen.
He didn't know why he was turned into this monster, but quite honestly, you guys had a lot to do with it. You just did, because you took a story that was fed to you and you ran with it.
And critical to that storyline were erroneous descriptions that George Zimmerman was white when he's actually part Hispanic.
The pegging of George as a white man was essential to get that narrative traction and get that ball rolling, and it's unfortunate.
By all accounts, key details surrounding Zimmerman's deadly encounter with Martin remain murky, including who attacked whom. It's more clear that Florida's Stand Your Ground law made for a difficult prosecution. Problem is, the media infused the case with larger symbolism.
As America faces big questions now about race, justice, and gun control.
Trayvon Martin was a child, racially profiled and gunned down.
The New York Daily News went so far as to draw parallels to the infamous lynching of Emmett Till. But according to one juror, race had nothing to do with the case.
I mean, just because he was black and George was Spanish or Puerto Rican, I don't think it had anything to do with this trial.
But the anger and pain remains, a point President Obama addressed today.
There are very few African-American men in this country who haven't had the experience of being followed when they were shopping in a department store. That includes me.
Which means it is about race.
African-American men.
No, it certainly was after today. Well, there was an incredulous, not that all the media were on this, but a disbelief that he could have been found not guilty. And, you know, even oh, I just lost my train of thought, sorry.
Well, if you paid any attention to the trial, you wouldn't have been surprised by that outcome. But, I mean, I agree with all of the criticism of the coverage of Zimmerman, but Trayvon Martin was grotesquely stereotyped and done a disservice by media coverage as well. He was stereotyped as, first of all, younger and smaller than he really was. That was an erroneous impression. We didn't really learn enough about him to rebut some of the garbage that came out on the internet, some of his tweets and, you know, casual teenage pretend thug talk. And that was, so that enabled that to be blown up by the anti-Trayvon Martin crowd into a much bigger deal than I think it probably was.
But I just remember what I was going to say. Even when the juror said it wasn't about race, the media didn't believe that. There was absolute disbelief on the part of the press that it could have been anything other than that. So even though she said that, and I know other people on the jury didn't say that, no one believed it.
Well, I have to say that's because she called him George about 9 million times. When she referred to Trayvon Martin, it was that boy. And come on. And then she said he looked suspicious, but acknowledged that he had no business getting out of his car. How did he look suspicious? Because he was walking through the neighborhood. That's how he looked suspicious. And let's not forget the fact that George Zimmerman, every time he called in somebody on his neighborhood watch, they were only black teenagers. So sorry, it was always there. Now, it's to the point of whether or not the media got caught up with the fact that, of course, because that was evident, it was going to turn out a certain way. Perhaps that's true of some, but I have to say that there were a lot of people along the way that I watched, and I watched this intently, who had been saying along the way, by the way, stand your ground, even if it's not articulated in much the way that the judge said you can't articulate racial profiling, but you can articulate profiling, is going to have an impact as a context in how this jury comes to its decision. So for me, I was waiting tense-like to see what was going to happen, and I honestly did not know. I did not have any illusion it was going to go the other way. There's a lot of emotion around it, of course, but I saw and heard reported, you know, some people with great amount of detail saying, here are some reasons why this is probably going to be not guilty, well before it came down.
Yeah. You know, It's hard to wrap my arms around the whole thing, so let me just look at a couple of things here. First of all, so much bad coverage. We were told over and over through the media that Florida's Stand Your Ground law had nothing to do with the case, and that the defense didn't invoke it, the prosecution didn't invoke it, and the press kept reporting that even after the verdict. The judge gave explicit instructions on Florida's Stand Your Ground law to the jury. This was the last thing ringing in the jury's ears before they began their deliberations. So how could the press keep reporting that Stand Your Ground had nothing to do with it? Second of all, to the point of as to the media's obsession with race, Washington Post columnist Richard Cohen this week wrote a roundly criticized column, and well, it should be roundly criticized, basically saying, of course it was about race, and why shouldn't George Zimmerman suspect Trayvon Martin was up to no good? After all, he was wearing a hoodie. I mean, that kind of brings us right back full circle, doesn't it?
That wasn't my takeaway from that column.
Well, it was pretty much everybody else's takeaway.
And the president actually addressed it today obliquely in his comments.
Yes, he
directly. Yeah, he absolutely addressed that column.
Nothing good can come from 24-hour news coverage. But
you are correct.
I do think that there was this. I remember last year examining the facts of this case, trying to figure out who was right, who was wrong, trying to figure out the nuances, and everybody was looking for a smoking gun to see. Was George Zimmerman a well-meaning but overzealous guy? You know, did Trayvon Martin do anything to him before? We'll never know the truth. Let's be honest. We just won't know what took place between them. And what we do know is that, you know, George Zimmerman saw him, thought he was suspicious, and got out of the car. I don't know. It's clear to me that if Trayvon Martin were a blonde 15-year-old wearing some Daisy Duke shorts, that call wouldn't have happened, and that wouldn't have gone.
There's no question that the media did set an agenda. I mean, as Zimmerman's attorney pointed out, NBC edited that tape.
That is crazy.
Absolutely.
Right.
That was
so that every other phrase was hoodie, black teenager, and just took everything, all the other context out of the conversation.
And how many of us listened to that, not realizing it was edited, and then wrote our own stories based on that?
There were efforts to downplay Zimmerman's injuries that turned out to be false. And one last grotesque bit of stereotyping by the media on the way out the door here. The notion that the verdict would result in race riots. I heard Rodney King's name mentioned. The entire, all black Americans were stereotyped in a vulgar way by that insinuation.
No, I would agree with that. That is absolutely the case. But I have to say, if he never got out of the car because he looked suspicious, we wouldn't be here.
Right. That's true.
So, I mean,
there's no question he racially profiled.
Well, and that's juror number 37 said he had the right to defend himself, meaning George. But he got out of the car. So don't get out of the car, then we don't have to get there. And we know by every statistic that has ever been done that if Trayvon Martin, as the president pointed out today, had stood his ground and shot, he would be in jail.
Mall cops are the worst.
Period.